peace and blessings. This is Derek Kumar. And, one of the first subjects I started learning about when I got on this path, one of the first things I started learning about was the different hemispheres of our brain. As most of you know, because you've probably already heard this before, and most of you know that we have a right hemisphere and a left hemisphere of our brain. The left hemisphere of our brain is the part of our brain that basically it helps us to organize things from a more concrete and a more logical manner, okay? Logical, orderly manner. Whereas the right hemisphere of our brain, it is more abstract. And this is the part of our brain that kind of goes ahead and gets us to organize things based upon how we feel, okay? So your left hemisphere is going ahead and is doing things from a kind of like I said, a logical, rational, scientific perspective, whereas the right hemisphere of your brain is doing things from a more abstract and emotional perspective. Okay. Now, what this means, by us going ahead and having a right hemisphere and a left hemisphere of our brain, what this means is that when it comes to dealing with things from a spiritual nature, the left hemisphere of our brain is basically the part of our brain that goes ahead and gets us to look outside of ourselves and try to understand for lack of a better word, understand God, okay? Understand God from an external perspective. Whereas the right hemisphere of our brain is trying to go ahead and get us to understand God or understand our divinity from within, okay? Now, like I said, what this means is that when we go ahead and we're approaching this from a metaphysical perspective, the whole point of this is for us to basically see that everything is part of the divine consciousness, okay? And where we went wrong is learning or seeing or believing that there's only one, okay? That there's only one perspective. There's only one way of seeing God, okay? That's where we went wrong, all right? And that still, for the most part, it still haunts us to this day. And when I'm saying that, this is the reason why a lot of us, when we get on this spiritual path, one of the first questions we ask, one of the first questions that it just stays in our mind is, where was God during slavery? Every time some traumatic event occurs, we're asking, where's God during this? Why didn't God come in and stop this, or whatever the case may be, okay? And when you approach it from that perspective, you're approaching it from a left hemisphere brain perspective, okay? You're seeing God as just being something external and not looking at God as being external and internal, all right? So where was God during this whole thing? God was up there chilling, okay? God is chilling where God is always doing. God is chilling. And the reason why God was chilling is because metaphysically, God is not going to stop anything from occurring. God does not, for instance, God does not stop a child from putting their hand on a hot stove. God does not stop us from ingesting poison like smoking cigarettes. And the reason why God doesn't do this goes back to the same thing. It's understanding, if you're looking at God to be a savior from that perspective, you're looking at God from a left brain perspective or left hemisphere brain perspective. And God is not going to do that. When you look at God metaphysically from a left brain, a left hemisphere, and a right hemisphere brain perspective, you understand that the reason why God is not going to do this is because how else would you learn what's going to be beneficial to you and what's not beneficial to you if God interferes with everything that you do? Okay? This is a part of free will. The reason God is not going to interfere is because of free will. Right? So that's where God is at. God does not, and when I tell people this and I say this, I say technically God really doesn't care. All right? Some people get offended for that reason because they're not understanding and they're not looking at this from a metaphysical perspective. Okay? Now, when you do not understand this metaphysically, that God is basically absent in a lot of things, okay? And it's not so much that God is absent. Like I said, God is distant. This is the reason why our ancestors, they describe God as being a distant creator. The whole point of doing that is to get us to understand that God is not going to come and save you. You have to save yourself, okay? So, and I've heard people go in here and they say that, but they don't never really clarify and explain what that means. So we're gonna get there. But when you don't understand that, when you don't understand that God is not your savior, okay, when you don't understand God from a metaphysical perspective, that you need both the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere of your brain to actually understand this and see that God is everything, that the divine consciousness exists all over, okay? That God is everything, never chair, okay? Lord of everything. When you don't understand that, that's what happens. You basically bounce from one religion to another religion looking for a savior. But when you do understand this, when you understand that you have these two hemispheres of your brain, which helps you to process all of this. When you do understand this, what happens is that you begin to understand, or you begin to see that your consciousness is expansive. Your consciousness is not just, your consciousness is wherever you put your attention. This is where your hermetic laws and all that come into effect. It's where you put your attention that matters, okay? And what I mean by this is there is nothing more empowering than having an altar space and you set a light in front of one of your spirits, knowing that your superconscious or spirit is going to take care of something. Okay? Nothing more empowering than being able to do that. There's nothing more empowering to be able to see you can go anywhere, you know. You can go to, you can see a statue and automatically you can go ahead and you can put your consciousness in that and make that statue work for you. Nothing more empowering than being able to do that. You make that statue work for you because that's what God does. That's what God and a goddess do. Okay? So you got to understand, we have to move away from this. The whole purpose of us being involved or dealing with this whole thing in regards to our spirituality is understanding our divinity. And this is a major part of understanding our divinity. Okay? So stop looking for a savior and become your own savior.
If you have any comments, questions, or suggestions, feel free to drop me a line. Until next time, at your brew. Peace.